What was the dream of free India like? And what came out of that dream in reality? Birendra Chattopadhyay's poem After Death 20 Years focuses on the contrast between the beautiful dream of Indian independence and the cruel reality of the partition of 1947. Birendra Chattopadhyay was a prominent and powerful Bengali poet. He was born in 1920 in Dhaka, East Bengal, and he died in 1985 in Kolkata, West Bengal. He was a poet of protests against tyranny and suffering of the people. On the one hand, he was a poet of socialist causes, and his poems struck thunderously against human misery and oppression. On the other hand, he kept his dream of a beautiful society alive within himself until his death. His poems were never published in reputed magazines, but he achieved great fame as a poet of little magazines. Birendra Chattopadhyay believed in the principle of socialism, and so he spoke for the downtrodden, working-class people. His poems are short, suggestive, and symbolic, and his voice was the voice of protest. Eminent Bengali poet and critic Shankha Ghosh described him as, in every sense, Bengal's foremost poet of protest. The poem, After Death 20 Years, or as it is called originally in Bangla, Mrittur Por 20 Bochor, is addressed to Rabindranath Tagore. Though the name of Rabindranath is not directly mentioned, when Birendra Chattopadhyay addresses the poet, we understand that it is the greatest figure in Bangla literature he is addressing. Just as in English the poet means Shakespeare, or in Sanskrit it means Kalidas, in Bangla it means Rabindranath. But why does Birendra Chattopadhyay address Rabindranath? And what does he have to say? Let us go through the text. The poem begins with a sudden and straightforward comment that Rabindranath did not have to see certain catastrophes that the poet has seen in the last 20 years since the death of Rabindranath in 1941. Because Rabindranath died in 1941, he did not have to see the sufferings of people in various occasions, such as the famine and the plague of 1942, the riots of 1946, and the partition of 1947. In calamities such as the plague and the famine, poor people died helplessly, while the rich could save themselves and even made profit doing black market businesses. It was one form of inhumanity, exploiting and not caring about the sufferings of others. On the other hand, when riots broke out on the 16th of August 1946 in Kolkata, it was a torturous fire ignited by political leaders and religious fanatics and spread by the mindless mass, resulting in mass murder, loots, rapes throughout Bengal and beyond. The sons of the land who used to fight for freedom from the British, who used to dream of an independent nation together, who used to think of themselves as Indians, suddenly began to kill each other in the name of religion. The flesh of mothers became the fuel with which they created a burning hell. Women became the battleground for the show of male supremacy. Whenever there is war or any kind of competition between groups of men to show which group is more powerful than the other, it is always the female body that suffers in the hands of men. Because of patriarchal upbringing and the inclination among men to prove a point through power instead of logic. Men tend to take women as objects and properties. In the process of showing one group's power to another, men of each group take the course of destroying, defiling, and seizing the property of the other. And since they consider women as property of men, the female body becomes the battleground, the fuel of the burning hell. The poet compares the partition of India in 1947 with madness. Here, Lumbini is not the place related to Buddhism, but it is Lumbini Park, Kolkata, where there is a mental asylum. The poet says that the riots and all kinds of inhumanity and the eventual partition were utter madness, and the whole country, especially he is talking about Bengal, was nothing but a mental asylum. Here, when Birendra Chattopadhyay utters the words poet, we get the clue that the pronoun you throughout the poem is actually the greatest poet of Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath did not have to experience the cruel scenes throughout Bengal, and Birendra Chattopadhyay says perhaps that is the reason Rabindranath could believe so much in the light of humanity. Rabindranath was an optimist, and Birendra Chattopadhyay is pointing at the fact that Rabindranath's optimism was like a light, whereas the inhumane situations after his death in 1941 have turned Bengal into a burning hell. It was the ideas, dreams, thoughts of Rabindranath that used to guide people. He was like the North Star to the minds that wanted a direction. In 1905, the British rulers divided Bengal for the first time, and we shouldn't forget how Rabindranath led the protest against that decision throughout his writings, speeches, and the famous Rakhi Bandhan. The British had to take back their decision in 1911 because of the protests throughout Bengal. The people didn't want to be divided. The same people of Bengal got engaged in riots and divided themselves into two 36 years later. There was no Rabindranath this time to provide them with a moral compass, and inhumanity prevailed. Now, what is crucial here to understand is how Rabindranath had dreamt of independent India. What was his idea of nationalism? To understand this point, we must at least read Rabindranath's poem Where the Mind is Without Fear and his infamous critique of nationalism. In brief, Rabindranath advocated for humanism and against the narrow-mindedness of separating people from people in the name of national identities and borders. He says that the world is one home for all people who are diverse in many aspects, be it ethnicity, language, religion, or culture. As long as we keep differentiating amongst ourselves, the problems of all humanity cannot be solved. One will oppress another, one will despise another, one will scorn the problems and limitations of others, and so on. Rabindranath believed that India would show the world the path of unity in diversity and would focus on the human causes rather than the political, religious, ethnic narrow-mindedness. Here, Birendra Chattopadhyay says that such dreams had inspired people like him. In a way, he says he had learned to dream about an independent India as Rabindranath had dreamt of it. But in the end, the reality became a stark contrast to that dream. Now, Birendra Chattopadhyay comments on the human condition throughout the 1940s and 50s. See, from the leftist perspective, the transfer of power was nothing but a fake independence. the cost of which was the partition, mass migration, and mass murder. Because of communal hatred and consequent partition, people lost their lives, their homes, their honor, their identity, their friends and family, their peace, their hope. The independence was a horrible one. The common and poor people suffered too much, whereas those who were able to afford security and safety were rejoicing and celebrating the occasion, completely ignoring the mass migration and bloodshed. Even after independence, the gap between the rich and the poor, the educated and the uneducated, the lower and the upper castes did not decrease. In a country which claims to be independent, there was inequality prevailing throughout. And from a socialist perspective, this cannot be regarded as true freedom. So, Birendra Chattopadhyay attacks the prevailing inhumanity with such strong phrases. He marks the 20 years following the death of Rabindranath as a history of sewage afloat. He compares the decadent and inhumane society with the old hag who runs the brothels at Shonagachi. He says there remains no difference amongst ministers, leaders, teachers, writers, students, and dogs on heat. He sarcastically remarks that this independent land joins all together, meaning everyone was so over-enthusiastic about independence and at the same time so careless about basic sense of humanity. Birendra Chattopadhyay comments in despair that the dreams regarding independence now seem to be too far-fetched, too unrealistic and ridiculous, like drunken jokes played on the reeds of an oft-used harmonium. The poet again remembers that Rabindranath, even in his nightmares, could not have imagined that his beloved dreamland would be in this calamitous condition. And because Rabindranath had neither seen nor imagined the possibility of such an independence, Birendra Chattopadhyay says he could remain true to his optimistic beliefs. The significance of the last line is that Rabindranath could retain his dreams and optimism unshaken, but perhaps it's not so easy for those who are constantly shaken by the daily dose of inhumanity seen around them. Just read today's newspaper, whatever date it is, and read Rabindranath's Where the Mind is Without Fear, side by side, and you will understand the frustration expressed by Birendra Chattopadhyay. You will understand the significance of this poem.